DeAndre Hopkins is headed to the Tennessee Titans. So now that we know he wasn't just going to play for a contender, did the Packers make a mistake not pushing harder to bring him in? Plus, what exactly is the plan at the safety position? Is there one? And more importantly, is it a good one? All of that on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. I've gone back and forth, right? I've gone back and forth on this DeAndre Hopkins situation and whether or not it makes sense for the Packers to have pursued him. And I understand both sides of this argument, which does not make for, the most compelling take. Oh, the Packers, they made a huge mistake. Or, oh, this is nonsense. Who cares? Whatever. I don't think either of those takes is the right take. I want to see Christian Watson get 130 targets. I want to see Romeo Doubs be the #2 in this offense. Let's see if he can do it. I want to see Jaden Reed get a ton of time in the slot. And if you have DeAndre Hopkins out there, maybe you have to slide Christian Watson in the slot more. There's a lot of different trickle-down effects here. So I get those arguments. I also am compelled by this idea of on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, where are you going? Where are you going? The Packers offense last year with Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb too, they were one of the best teams in the league in turning first downs into first downs before third down. So on first and second down, getting another first down. Great offenses are not great on third down. Third downs, small sample size theater. It is a really small portion of the game. You'd like to avoid third downs. In fact, the best teams often face the fewest third downs, and that amplifies the small sample size theater because now you have fewer opportunities and a smaller sample where variance can just run rampant. It's the same thing with red zone offense. It's why these kinds of things are not consistent indicators of your quality of play year in and year out. I am not saying that I think that doesn't matter, but I do think it matters less than I used to think it did, if that makes any sense. Like I used to be more compelled by this idea. And I mean like 3 months ago, but the more I've thought about it over the course of the offseason, and I mean before he signed, he just signed with someone. I did come back to the idea that I think it would have been a good thing for the Packers to do. It would make you better, it would give you a better read on Jordan Love, all those things. I do also understand why you're not doing it, but this idea of needing to go get a bucket, I talked about it a lot. It's one of my favorite ideas. Good offenses don't need to worry about it, and it's a bigger deal in the playoffs. That being said, how many times, going back to 2020, 2021, 2019, 2018, 2017, when the Packers offense just wasn't quite clicking, did Aaron Rodgers just throw the ball to Davante Adams in a high leverage spot? And that was the spark you needed. Like you have this wonky start against the Bears, and all of a sudden it's 4th down and plus territory. You're going for it on 4th and 10. You're taking a gamble, and Davante just cooks their 4th corner from the slot for a touchdown. This is an actual situation that happened a couple years ago. I think it was 2020. That set them on a course. That lit the fire, that lit the fuse, that became a fire, and then you go on to win. Now, yes, maybe Christian Watson can do that. Maybe Romeo Doubs can do that. Maybe Jaden Reed can do that. Maybe Luke Musgrave or Tucker Kraft can do that. We don't have any idea if they can. And so even understanding that you are not trying to go above and beyond to win the Super Bowl this year, you've got a lot of young talent that you want to see. Understanding all of that. The most important thing to come out of this season is to get an evaluation on Jordan Love. So I don't think they're going to regret not doing this. But just walk with me for a second. In week 3, and obviously I don't want this to happen, but let's say week 3, Christian Watson, I'm trying, remember David Bakhtiari last year? We're going to talk about Bakhtiari at the end. He missed a month because of appendicitis, had to take his appendix out. Let's say Christian Watson has to have his appendix out and he misses a month. What does this offense look like? What does this offense look like? Are you going to get a good read of what Jordan Love is if you don't have any receivers who can threaten defenses in a meaningful way? This is essential to what your season is. So this is why ultimately I think, okay, if he would have gone to somewhere where he was not going to be a title favorite or even contender, the reports was he wanted to go to Buffalo, wanted to go to Kansas City. They did not have the money. They were not going to pay him 2 years, 26, even if a lot of that money is fake. The Packers were probably not going to pay him that money either. And the Titans are in a worse situation from a receiver standpoint because Christian Watson showed a lot more than Treylon Burks. And they don't have a Romeo Doubs or a Jaden Reed on the roster. Luke Musgrave, if you want to look at a guy whose rookie season you kind of like to emulate, Chigakonkwo would be that guy. A lot of big plays, not a lot of overall production, but really effective when he got opportunities. I think that's sort of a middle high-end outcome for Luke Musgrave, who I think is going to play way more than Chig did in Tennessee, but they needed this more. I just think there was wisdom in doing this, and there is a scenario where I do think it will look not like, I almost said like Brian Gutekunst was derelict, because I don't think that's not quite true. Again, this is not the most compelling A-block take that I could have ever had, but I thought it was important to talk about that there's definitely a scenario where you go into next season and Christian Watson gets hurt and Romeo Doubs doesn't take the step that you thought and Luke Musgrave isn't ready, and all of a sudden you're like, how do we even tell what Jordan Love is? You're sort of in that, I think Justin Fields has shown us enough to not be optimistic about what he is. But like Justin Fields last year showed nothing as a passer. And if you listen to Bears fans, which you should not do, but if you listen to Bears fans, they will tell you, well, he was set up to fail. Didn't have the receivers, although Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet and a really good run game. There have been worse teams. I've definitely seen worse teams. But you're not setting Jordan Love up for success. And your whole franchise's future hinges on, at the very least, knowing what this guy is. That's why ultimately I came around on the idea. Like I'm not in the Joe Marino when he came on a couple weeks ago and was like, I think the Packers should do everything. Like I think that's the team, all that stuff. I'm not there. If everything breaks right for the Packers in a perfect world, and I think this is ultimately where I've landed. In a perfect world, you don't need it. In a perfect world, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs stay healthy. Christian Watson takes the step that I believe, and I think the Packers believe he's going to take. That Romeo Doubs slots into that number 2 role, that Luke Musgrave, just by sheer opportunity, puts together a nice season, that he stays healthy. But those are a lot of ifs. And when it comes to evaluating the most important player on your roster, and I don't think that's hyperbole, then is that really how you want to handle this? And I think that raises important questions about, okay, is this the only way this could have been done? And I also feel like the other part of this is it only made sense to me to get a guy who really changed your life. And I think DeAndre Hopkins gives you enough. Like I said, I've gone back and forth on this. Like if you go back, I have takes on this where I'm just like, doesn't make sense. And there's other times where I'm just like, this is a great idea. This is where I am right now today. And I'm thinking about it because of course he was signed somewhere else. But you need to do everything that you can. And that doesn't mean improving the wide receiver 3 spot by going out and signing, fringe starter X. Like, okay, yeah, technically your roster is better, but like, who cares? Let's see what Samori Toure has. Let's see what Dontavian Wicks has. Let's see who Grant DuBose is or Malik Heath or whatever. That is an understandable place to be. For me, this is the only guy, it was him and Odell were the 2 players that could have really changed your life on the open market. Odell got way more money than I think Green Bay would have ever been comfortable paying. When you see what Nuke got, I would have been way more comfortable in that world. I'm fine that they landed here because I understand. I see the vision. I understand it. I don't understand what they're doing at safety. I genuinely do not understand what they're doing at safety. And we're going to talk about that in just a second right here on Locked On Packers. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You have so many jobs in the world. So many jobs that sound alike but are totally different. Or that you think you want to do as a potential employee, and then you read the job description and you're like, oh, I don't know about that. Or if you're an employer, someone who might look nice on paper but doesn't have the specific skill that you're looking for. Well, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Everydayers, this week on the show, I think we're going to have an Aaron Rodgers signature series. We have some guests in the hopper here, so a lot of fun stuff coming down the pike. And we're now I think we're less than 2 weeks away now from training camp opening. So a lot of fun things to talk about and preview as we move forward here on Locked On Packers. I was working on our roster countdown over at The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. And the piece that I did on Friday was on this weird group of players. It's a group of day 3 rookies, of special teams players, and then 2 safeties who could either be core special teamers or might have to be starters. Tarvarius Moore and Jonathan Owens. And I went to look up some of the Jonathan Owens Pro Football Focus stuff. 75 players at safety played 500 snaps last year. Jonathan Owens was the 74th highest graded player. The only player who graded out worse was Darnell Savage. Adrian Amos was 70th out of 75. They went from having, in 2020, at the end of the 2020 season, they had the best, most productive safety group in football. 2 years later, they had really just a 1-year gap, the 2021 season. In 2022, they had the worst safety group in football. And they have invested, since 2019, essentially nothing into the position. Essentially nothing. Like, Will Redmond had to play real snaps in the NFC Championship game. You had guys picked up off the street fighting for playing time because they didn't have a third safety that they trusted. They invested no draft capital in it. They moved Tariq Carpenter to linebacker because he wasn't never really a safety. He was always meant to just be a special teams player. And they're like, well, let's see what they can do here. He played some outside linebacker even. What are we doing? And I just look around going, this was so avoidable. It was so avoidable. You knew you needed help. Every year there are guys just available on the street. Right now there are guys available on the street. John Johnson III, still available, still out there. This safety group is bad. Now, Darnell Savage, okay. You can see the path to him being a useful player this year. He's been a useful player in the past. A lot of potential, a lot of athletic ability. It is really about confidence with him. If he's playing with confidence, and I thought in the second half of the year, he played with a lot more confidence. Playing in the nickel, I thought really rejuvenated him in a lot of ways. He's still not, great in coverage from the nickel, but that was also, he had to dust off some skills going back to like Maryland. I want to see him used all over the field again this year. I want to see him in some of those robber situations. I want to see him in some nickel situations. I want to see him blitzing. He's best when you can use him in a lot of different ways. Just having him sit in a too high shell is not the way. But you heard Cody Alexander on Friday, and if you missed it, go back and listen. Talk about the safety play. The safety play has been a huge problem on the team. And to fix it, Brian Gutekunst went out, and on paper you hear, oh, well, he got a guy who started last year for one team, and then you got a backup on the best defense in football. That sounds really exciting. Just on paper, that sounds really exciting. But Tarvarius Moore is most famous to Packer fans, at least, for getting cooked by Romeo Doubs in a preseason game on a touchdown from Jordan Love on 4th down. Beautiful throw, beautiful catch, beautiful route, but cooked. And Jonathan Owens was one of the 5 worst starting safeties in the league by PFF grade. I'm not going to pretend like I watched 17 Texans games. I didn't. I probably watched like parts of 5. I certainly watched parts of the 4th quarter of that last game because it was hilarious, and gave the Bears the number 1 pick. Not super chill. This is the plan. This was the best you could do. Like, there's a difference between, like, I could forgive anyone for thinking, if they just looked at the safety position, that if you wanted to make the case that this team was tanking, you'd point to the safeties and go, look at that group. This team is not trying to win games. That's how underwhelming it is. Now, when the Packers brought in Keyshawn Nixon, I said on Twitter that if Keyshawn Nixon is playing, like, Keyshawn Nixon has not proven he can be a rotation level player. So if he's playing, that's a problem. He responded. He saw it. Okay. And in spot duty, played really well in the nickel. He's going to get a chance to start in the nickel this year. And of course, became an all-pro kick returner. But even Rich Bisaccia, who he came to play with from Las Vegas, did not know he was this. And now that I know that he is, and what he's done in Green Bay and the attitude and the culture that he's brought, I feel like I never should have doubted him. But I didn't know that at the time. Well, that's true of these players. It could just be that these guys were in bad situations. Now, Jonathan Owens comes from a Lovie Smith defense. Play a lot of cover 2. I think the Packers are going to play a lot of cover 2 this year, so it's at least a system that there is some overlap. Joe Barry comes from that Tampa 2 system. So, okay. Tarvarius Moore, of course. Robert Saleh, that defense. D'Amico Ryans last year. They played a lot of quarters. So there's certainly some overlap here. But your starting safeties are Rudy Ford and Darnell Savage, both guys who were benched last year. And you brought in guys who were, if their teams had their druthers, preferred bench players. So you have 4 safeties. 4 safeties who really are maybe not starters. Like, Darnell Savage has played above starter level in his NFL career, but last year was so bad he got benched. And there's veterans out there. There were veterans earlier in the process out there. There were safeties in this draft. There were safeties in last year's draft. There were safeties in the draft before that. The Packers did nothing. They did nothing. I don't understand it. Now, I do understand this idea that when you're an umbrella player, it's not like it used to be where you got all these single high safeties and you need a field tilter there. And so they're just like, well, we're not going to invest a ton in that position. The Rams did not invest a ton in that safety position. I get it. But they had Jalen Ramsey. They had Aaron Donald. When they won the Super Bowl, they had Von Miller. It's a different beast. It's a different animal. When Vic Fangio was killing teams in Denver, he had Justin Simmons. In Chicago, he had Adrian Amos at the top of his game. Eddie Jackson in the best years of his career by far. You go back and you think of those 49ers teams. Now, they had great linebackers. They had some really good pass rushers, but you think of their safeties, Dante Whitner, Deshaun Golson. You don't remember who played corner on those teams. You remember who played safety. No, you don't need to invest heavily, I don't think, in the safety position to have a good defense, especially in this version of it. But you need guys who can play their role, who can be reliable. And the biggest problem, the reason Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford were benched last year is because they were unreliable players. Like having an athletically limited player who always knows where to be in this defense is actually much preferred to a hyper gifted ball hawking kind of player who you cannot rely on to make tackles, especially. You have to be able to fill from depth in the run game. You have to be able to tackle in the open field. This is the biggest problem with the Packers is they don't have guys who can reliably do that. And the Packers, for whatever reason, have done nothing. They have done nothing to address it. And I don't understand it. Speaking of not understanding it, I want to address some Packers player slander. We're going to do that coming up on Locked On Packers. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, a lot more here on the Locked On Packers podcast, getting you ready for everything in training camp. Go subscribe to The Leap. We had another piece out today on our roster review, or preview, if you will, a roster countdown. We are getting close to the big time primo players, but this is where I think the list gets really interesting. The breakdowns are more important to me because these are the guys who are actually going to be playing and having a meaningful role on this team, fighting for bigger roles potentially on this team. And go check out Locked On Sports today. It's all the biggest stories in sports that you need in under 20 minutes. Go check that out wherever you get podcasts. So a couple lists came out over the weekend, the ESPN lists. And, look, I know that these are fodder for people like me, sports talk hosts. Some really bad ones. Like Aaron Jones not being on the running backs list is a joke. It's an absolute joke. He's a top 5 running back. Pick a metric, watch the tape, do anything. Do anything. Please learn ball is what I'm saying to these NFL evaluators, coaches, whoever was in this poll, and it's supposed to be real NFL people. They're supposed to know ball better than anybody. This is a joke. It's an absolute joke that he's not on that list. And Aaron Jones called it out, said, okay, keep sleeping on me. Now, Allen Jenkins, top 4 interior offensive lineman, not just guards, interior offensive lineman, and in fact got some votes at number 1. He's back to playing where he belongs as guard. I thought he could play tackle. Maybe he can, fully healthy coming off the ACL. Right now, though, he is an all-pro level guard. And I think I would rather him be an all-pro guard in the NFL the way it is right now than him be just like a fine right tackle. Given the other players on this team, I think Zach Tom is better suited to play tackle. So I think that makes more sense for them. The one that really is just like offensive is David Bakhtiari. Did not make the top 10 offensive tackles list. There are not 10 offensive tackles better than David Bakhtiari. There were not 10 offensive tackles better than David Bakhtiari last year. And here's something that I think we forget. You look at the games played number and you go, oh, well. But he missed, 2 games to start the season with the knee. Played a couple games, got back up to speed, had to miss a game with knee maintenance. And then he did not have a knee-related absence the rest of the season. And when he played, he was incredible. Top 5 offensive tackle graded by Pro Football Focus. In fact, gave up pressures at a better rate than Trent Williams, who was the number 1 tackle on this list. When he played, he was elite. He missed a month in the middle of the season for appendicitis, had to have his appendix out. Had nothing to do with his knee. This is not like, oh, he's injury prone. No, he had an injury. His body did not respond well to the treatment of that injury. He ended up having a setback and another procedure on the knee. He came back, was managing it, had to sit, and then came back and was healthy enough with the knee to play the rest of the season. Had a fluke, non-football related absence, and then came back and played awesome. He was awesome when he was on the field. And I think we have to ask ourselves, number 1, does he want to stay here long term? But number 2, is an extension in play? Is an extension in play for David Bakhtiari? Very rare for the Packers to give out this level of contract, but it's not like he's old. If the knee is going to be okay, you could give him a 3 or 4 year deal. And I think the Packers are the only team that would be willing at his age and with his injury history, especially because, you might not have as much information medically that would give him the amount of money that he could make. Now, maybe he wants to go play in New York, wants to play with Aaron Rodgers, but is Rodgers going to play more than 1 more year? Is he going to play the rest of this year? Like, there's a non-zero chance he's just like, you know what? I'm good. I'm going to go back to Malibu. So I just don't see Bakhtiari doing that. That just doesn't seem like the kind of thing he would do. I think we have to talk about it. And I think by the middle of the season, if you're the Packers, you got to start looking at it. Now, there's money left on this deal. We've talked about, I think this is going to be his last year, short of an extension. They'll have to move money and make things. They'll basically have to rip up this contract and put together a new one. And I think if you're Bakhtiari, you would be open to that because of just the way NFL contracts work. And also, you're just not going to make that money back if you get cut this year. You're just not going to make that money back, but the Packers are going to pay you like a top of market offensive tackle or something close to it. You're getting elite level play. It makes Elgton Jenkins better to have David Bakhtiari there. It makes your whole offensive line to have David Bakhtiari there. You'd rather have one of the 2 or 3 best offensive tackles. I don't care what this ESPN list says. One of the 2 or 3 best offensive tackles in the league. You'd much rather have that guy than not have that guy. Those are the kinds of guys you pay. And if you're the Packers, assuming he wants to stay, and that's a question that has to be answered. If he wants to stay and he can stay healthy this year and plays well, absolutely an extension should be on the radar. It is something that I think makes sense for the Packers. Doesn't make sense with their timeline. A lot of their young players, these are young players that don't need contracts. Young players who don't need extensions coming up. Rashawn Gary needs his extension, but they already did the Elgton Jenkins extension. It seems unlikely that Darnell Savage is going to get an extension. Even if he does, it's not going to be for, top of market kind of money. Considering, as I mentioned, he got benched last year. Even if he has a Pro Bowl All Pro season this year, I don't think he can command, that what did Tyrann Mathieu get a couple years ago? I'm trying to think of some of the big safeties. What did Jesse Bates just get in Atlanta? I don't think he can command that kind of money. Just hasn't been that kind of player over the course of his career. So they don't have to pay a lot of their core guys. They have the opportunity and the outlays to give them the space to do that. He's still an elite player. And I think that he has taken an ungodly amount of guff that was totally undeserved for the way that the last 18 months were handled. Plus, no one wanted to be out there more than he did. And I really wish a lot of people had not treated him the way that they did. I thought that was totally unfair. And I wouldn't blame David Bakhtiari if I was mad at those people, or if I was just I understanding the Packer fan is not a monolith, I think he has a right to be peeved at Packer fans, even though it wasn't everybody, because there were enough people. There were a lot of people. I know the Twitter is not a real place, but Bakhtiari is extremely online. He saw a lot of the stuff being said about him. And I would not blame him for the unfair criticisms, for being mad about that stuff. So I don't expect that it was a lot of people that listen to this show, because I think that the people who listen to this show have brains. And I think that a lot of the criticism comes from people who are just brainless. But it was it did happen, and what happened was ridiculous. He's an elite player, still an elite player, and if he's an elite player again this year who plays 14, 15 games. I mean, Teron Armstead in Miami got a big contract. He plays 13 games every year, but when he plays those 13 games, he's incredibly valuable. And that's the same thing with David Bakhtiari. Even if he only plays 12 to 15 games every year, that guy's worth near top of market money, because he is, if not the best pass blocker, one of the 2 or 3 best pass blocking tackles in the league. And that is incredibly, incredibly valuable, especially with a young quarterback. All right, back tomorrow, much more on Locked On Packers. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hit us up live on our Locked On Packers YouTube page, you can go subscribe over there, so you'll always know when to stay Locked On Packers.